Hello and welcome to the now award-nominated Stupid Ancient History with Midgley.
And Taylor, and as always, the amazing James, Science Toolboy Extraordinaire. We'll explain a little bit more about that as we go, won't we?
Hello.
Hello. And today we're going to tackle the question, why should I choose ancient history? So, in a slight deviation from our normal format, we're going to try and answer a lot of the questions that you might have.
Or don't even know that you've got yet.
Yeah, about why you should choose ancient history. Obviously, we're both quite biased on this subject, but we'll try our hardest to be objective.
But the most important thing is to make an informed decision and make sure you know what you're getting into.
So we've given James a series of questions that normally come up around about this time of year when choosing subjects.
And we're going to try and answer them as honestly and amusingly.
Yeah, as possible.
Are you ready, James?
I am born ready.
Born ready. So, first question, James.
Why choose ancient history?
A very good question. So, James, you're a scientist, are you not?
I am.
You are, and you've got no real background in ancient history?
Not other than hearing you two tell me things, no.
And over the last 9 months while we've been telling you things, is it fair to say you've enjoyed it?
I have enjoyed it.
There we go. First reason to choose ancient history is because it is really interesting. It is hilarious. It is funny. It gives you a chance to look at things that you wouldn't normally do. You get to study the ancient world and all the colourful characters that brings with it and all their untoward shenanigans. And they've kept you amused, have they not, James?
I have chuckled quite a bit while
Yeah,
reading
I was going to say you get to look. I would say you get to look at the naughty bits of history.
I have just jotted around for something to bring up adult content on my
Yeah,
sheet.
there are a few adult themes, but I mean, it's not all just sword, sex and spears.
There's a lot of
Yeah,
that,
it is, yeah. But it's interesting. Unlike a lot of other courses, you do get to study kind of different peoples and different places. So there's a study of ancient Persia. So you look at Middle Eastern history before the millennia. There's character studies on people like Cleopatra, these strong women throughout history. So yeah, there's the sword, sex and spears, but there's an awful lot more to it than that.
You also, I would say, get to look at things and sources and material which is completely different to anything that you will have probably looked at before.
Yeah, and it's definitely the most fun you can have whilst doing a GCSE.
How is it different to history?
So, I would say it's like a mixture of English literature and history. It's a lot
And
more
archaeology.
And archaeology. It's a lot more about the story as opposed to just looking at facts, because we don't have that many
Facts.
solid facts. So we have to look at ancient literature and what that says. And a lot of that is written more as a story or a narrative than you would get with modern history, where you might be looking at documents and photographs and things like that. So that is the main difference, I would say. And there's a lot more emphasis on the historical sources as well, because that's all we've got to work with.
Yeah, obviously the material is very different. We don't do anything past 100 AD.
No.
So you do get, if you want to look at something really, really old, rather than just your usual diet of the Nazis, it gives you that different world to look into.
When is ancient history? When does ancient history begin, and when is it just history?
If you go by the international guidelines on when a body becomes an artifact, at what time you can go into a museum instead of a grave, 1,000 years.
Okay.
But yeah, it's pre-BC up to maybe 500 AD. It's Greeks, Romans, Egypt, all the really old stuff. But yeah, the big difference is the source material. Because the details are so sketchy, ancient writers had a habit of embellishing things. So there's always a few fun facts and tall tales.
Can you do it with history?
You absolutely can do it with history. The two subjects are both history types. They are very similar. The skills you develop in one will help you with another. It's all about critical thinking, source analysis, holding a narrative and looking at causation. So yeah, of course you can do it with history. It's effectively, you're doing two GCSEs that are very, very similar.
The basic skills are the same, aren't they, as well? So ultimately, you're still doing source analysis, and you're still writing essays. So those are the two main components that apply to either ancient or modern.
Two birds with one historical stone.
Why is it relevant?
It is still relevant. It's dead easy for people to just dismiss ancient history as it was a long time ago. The world's moved on. Nobody cares anymore. But what you find is the problem is the human race are really, really bad at learning from past mistakes. And what you'll find is a lot of the mistakes we are still making right now happened 2,000 years ago. So it's absolutely relevant to a lot of the things that are going on in the world. You look at some of the kind of corruptions of power, the rise of demagogues, all these kind of things, it's all happened in ancient history. And sometimes looking at it through such a distant lens really helps kind of make it a bit more obvious, because you can see, even though it's a completely different world, the problems are still the same. People are still idiots. There are always still bad people who will do bad things to others.
And good righteous people.
And where? There's not many
Other
good
people.
righteous.
Normally the women are the...
Well, interestingly as well, if you look at like the ancient world's perception of gender, that's really interesting. So the treatment of women as kind of vilified monsters or angelic heroines is still somewhat relevant.
Yeah.
And even kind of ancient ideas about sexuality, the historical difference where you can explore ideas about sexuality in the ancient world is also really relevant and really interesting to a lot of people. So you're making sense of quite difficult issues and complex issues, but through that comfortable lens of thousands of years of history.
The other thing as well to say, not so much about the content but about the skills, it's a very academic subject, which obviously is great if you're planning on doing other academic type essay-based subjects at A-level. So it's something that shows that you've got them abilities, and the skills that you learn are transferable onto, you know, lots of other things at A-level and even further on into like university and things like that. So the skills you learn are also really important and really relevant.
There you go. Cool.
What if someone doesn't want to work in a museum? What jobs can you do with ancient history?
I mean, I don't understand why you wouldn't want to work in a museum. However, there are lots of other things that you can do. So yes, you can use it for kind of a very specific role that is 100% linked to history, like museum work, but there are other things that you can do as well. So the skills that you learn are really, really useful for things like working in politics. You find a lot of politicians who've got degrees and things in ancient history. Don't let that put you off. Also law, it's really good for that as well. And also things even like journalism too. And if you did want to do kind of research, whether that be for, you know, TV or something like that, and you could of course become a teacher as well. That's always a good option.
Yeah, it's what they call a facilitating subject. People, employers, and even further education, they like the critical thinking aspect of it, the ability to construct an argument. Absolutely, definitely for law, anything like that. Boris Johnson has a degree in this.
But again, don't let that put you off.
Yeah,
that's what we should say.
But yeah, so yeah, it's not necessarily what job can I do with it. It's more a case of what job can't you do with it. Interesting, a large number of medics have some kind of background in a classical education. Not necessarily ancient history, but Latin or classics or something similar. It's something that always looks good on a CV.
Yeah.
What about universities and sixth form colleges?
What about them?
What,
They're really good. You should go.
Do they like ancient history?
Yeah, again, like we said before, history, ancient history, they are facilitating subjects. They always look good on applications. They've got the historical academic rigour that institutions like. Regardless of what subject you're going on to do, again, it shows that you can construct arguments, you can retain facts and hold narrative. So it's a general good all-rounder. With ancient history, though, you've got the added bonus of it's a little bit more exotic. There aren't many places in the country that do this. So if you rock up somewhere with ancient history on your grade list, you're instantly going to stand out for good reasons. Not for bad reasons, for good reasons. Again, even if you don't want to do ancient history at university, even if you want to do modern history at university, it's a facilitating subject, and because it is that little bit more different, it is that little bit more exotic and a bit more interesting, it will start that conversation when you go for interviews at these colleges. If you think about your average sixth form college interviewer, they may come across 50, 60 people with history as a GCSE. But of that 50, 60 people, they'll maybe come across one or two with ancient history GCSE. So it's good in that way. It kind of peaks your head above the parapet a little bit more.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're doing subjects which are completely different, sometimes doing something like ancient history as well, for example, if you're doing predominantly maybe like science or maths or whatever, then doing ancient history too, people like it, don't they? Because it shows you kind of a more rounded pupil. You've got kind of more strings to your bow than just
certainly when we look
one
at sixth form
direction.
applications, the better candidates tend to have a bit of a foil. So certainly if they're applying for medicine, they will have all the sciences ticked off. But usually as well, universities tend to look for that something else.
Yeah.
What else do you have in your bag apart from you're good at science?
Is it harder than history?
I wouldn't say it's harder. There are parts of it, if we're being completely honest, there are parts of it which are more challenging. And the thing I would say is the amount of sources that you've got to cover. You have to cover a lot more material in ancient history than you do doing modern history at GCSE. Just because you've got to, by kind of order of the exam board, if you like, you've got to cover a lot more different individual sources than you have to really cover if you're doing modern. But I think that is the most difficult part of it. I think the other parts of it are not really that dissimilar. Once you get into how to kind of write a question, once you understand what the technique is in order to actually tackle the different types of questions, then no, I think it's probably kind of on a similar, playing field and even keel to normal history. But I think the amount that you've got to do is possibly the thing that some people could find a challenge.
It's the nature of it. There's
Yeah.
a lot of by the nature of it, there's a lot of reading because the material comes from these ancient histories. But again, they're like stories. This is where the English literature bit comes in. If you like a good story, this is probably more for you than analysing economic data from Weimar Germany to see what effect the Great Depression had on it. You're not going to get that kind of thing in ancient history. If there's something that's tedious to explain, they'll attribute it to God. As you well know, James.
Yes.
The other thing that is different is it's the world that you're studying. There's a lot of immersion to be done. So at the start of the course, a lot of people get a bit flustered because they don't understand
the language,
the names, the world they're living, the ideas and the practices. But once you can step into that world, it all starts to fall together. The courses are well put together. They all match up, so all your units will sing to each other and help you get immersed in that world. And the exams are tough, but all exams are tough.
Yeah, and it's more about being able to write quite a lot, but that is something that you learn how to do, and after a lot of practice that you get through the studying of the course, you get better at that, and that is not really an issue. So it's just like anything, practice makes perfect.
Is it just studying a load of old dead white guys?
There are old dead white guys.
Guess there's some old dead women as well.
There are some old dead women, yeah. Old dead white guys, yeah. All the primary sources you will look at come from men, and they are well dead. But what's good about the course is you're not just studying the story of old dead white guys. You've got quite a diverse kind of pan-Mediterranean culture going on. So you're looking at things like the Middle East and the rise of the Persian Empire. They're really fascinating. You look at how women interact with these groups. You get people like Alexander the Great, who spread his empire as far east as India. The Roman Empire and how they get on with different people under their thumb. So it's not just all old dead white guys. There's a lot more to it than that.
And we can't forget the women either. So you look at some really strong women. Cleopatra probably being the most obvious and the main one, but then you also look at examples of strong women within the Roman Empire as well.
Within the Persian world.
Yeah, within the Persian Empire. And they're not necessarily exactly what you would think, so they challenge some of the kind of ideas that you might have about what an ancient woman, what their role would have been. And a lot of the things that come up, you can apply them to kind of modern day, about this idea of what an ideal woman should be. So that's quite an interesting spin. And yes, you're looking at sources that are written by men, but then that obviously makes it more interesting when you're looking at how they approach
It starts a
women
good
in the
discussion.
ancient world. Yeah, it does promote a really good discussion.
So yeah, there are some dead white guys. We're not going to deny that, but there's more than that. So there you have it, our very quick sort of frequently asked questions about why you should choose ancient history. We hope this has been useful. If you've got a question that we haven't answered, leave it as a comment below and we'll try and think of a good answer to it. Until next time, thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.